Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Dev Section group conversation. Today is November 5th, and I'll be your host. My name is Eric Brinkman. I'm the Director of Product for the Dev Section, and I'm joined by Tim Zalman, who's the Director of Engineering for the Dev Section, and the broader Dev Section team members as well from both engineering, product, and product design. We don't seem to yet have any questions. So while people are joining the meeting, I can just touch on a few highlights on slide 2. This will largely be a repeat of the video. If you've watched that on the title slide, there's a 5-minute highlight video that has me walking through each of these things. But just a few things to highlight from a hiring perspective. We've added 2 PMs and 3 designers since our last group conversation. From a strategy perspective, we recorded a few videos that walk through the fiscal year 21 dev strategy, as well as what we're doing and thinking and iterating about on compliance. And compliance is becoming something that's really a hot button topic for a lot of organizations. It always has been, but especially in the construct of GitLab, we're starting to see a lot of people wanting to solve their compliance problems inside of the application. So I'm excited to iterate there. And that's a really interesting recording between Sid and the compliance team on what we should consider and how we should tackle compliance inside of GitLab. We've also focused and added a group that is going to be focused around the handbook. And I'm sure a number of you have seen this if you've been watching Slack. This is actually called the Static Site Editor group, and the group lives in the create stage. And the group has 2 categories, Static Site Editor and the GitLab Handbook. And so the Static Site Editor focus is going to be around creating an editing experience around static site editing, of which the handbook is a static site. We want that to be a little bit easier for non-technical users. And then we also have a category to focus on general handbook improvements, such as increasing the build times and making sure that the deployments are quick and speedy so that changes get out there to the public very, very frequently. Okay, still no questions. I will keep going. From an accomplishment perspective, we've done some really neat things, and most of 12.3 and 12.4 highlights on the blog post were actually came out of the dev section. So things like MR dependencies in the same project, APIs for instance level audit events. We now have code owner approvals for protected branches. One thing that's really interesting is the ability to do a partial clone. And so selecting which files you actually want to clone when you clone a repository. This is an alpha support, but something that will really help kind of increase the usability of repositories that have large files. And then kind of something that's really cool, and I know a lot of people have been asking about it, you can now move multiple cards on a board at one time. And so if you didn't know that, now you know, and feel free to check that out and let us know if you are liking that feature or not. All right, we've got our first questions. Robert, would you like to verbalize your question?
Sure. So I'm just looking at the roadmap around plan, and I saw that there's roadmap for doing some more work around epics going through to 2020. But I'm curious as to if we have any kind of roadmap for things like personal Kanban. For example, I work across 4 or 5 groups, and I want a Kanban that joins all those together so I can see a personal board of just my items, the ability to, go look at things that I'm specifically tracking or notifying and making to do a little more lovable, right? Like that. Basically, this would stuff that would go into like the bottom tier. It's for the individual contributor, but things that make that quality of life better, make it easier to track your own work. Because right now, I know a lot of folks keep all that and stuff in a side Google Doc, and that's just not really efficient, right? It's like duplicating data. So I'm just wondering if there's what the roadmap is, and if, where that's going.
Yeah, that's a great question, Robert. Gabe, do you want to take that one?
I think you can already do that actually today with the assignees lists. If you have a board just for the things that are assigned to you, Correct me if I'm wrong.
Yeah, you can't do it across groups right now. I know that Gabe's got a bunch of improvements on making boards just work better in general. The other thing that we've talked about is this concept of a workspace where you could have not just seeing the items that you're responsible for, but like an activity feed that is kind of tailored to you and the items that are assigned to you and what you care about. So yeah, in general, we want to make the personal experience of GitLab a little bit better. And we'll be focusing on that. In fact, Jeremy and I were just talking about creating a group to focus on workspaces and teams. Teams is another construct that we have, right? We have, the instance for most GitLab users today, then we have groups, and most people are organizing their teams within groups, but most large organizations have the concept of a sprint team, which may span multiple groups, multiple projects. It doesn't actually matter which group you live in. It just matters who's on your team kind of in an org chart. So this is a construct we don't have in GitLab today that we'll also be focusing on. And then the concept, back to your point, Robert, is this construct or this idea of a group level workspace or a group level dashboard that could be kind of up leveled from an individual, but into a team member's dashboard so you can see kind of the work that's in flight with your team and then the updates that have been made there as well. Christopher, you got the next question.
Yeah, this is totally real time in regards to, I think, the MR for the static site editor group and the handbook team got merged. And I know I added a little bit of a comment because we're having the team distributed. So I want to make sure you and I are on the same page, Eric, in regards to the fact of, are you thinking it's one team, two teams? How do you think about this, these two categories specifically, it's a little bit different, it seems like.
Yeah, I think of it as a single team. And so, yeah, just to give others listening a little bit of context, I think the decision was to put the product manager in the create stage because it's more of a creation activity, but the engineers out of the growth team because we were looking to solve this team's needs with full stack engineers, and the growth team has the model for essentially full stack engineering there. And so, yeah, it is meant to be a single team where this single team would focus on enhancing the single site editing experience as well as essentially making the handbook more efficient and focusing on things like upgrading middleman if that's going to give us build time increases in terms of speed and deployment.
Where will the area of focus be initially? Like say the first quarter will be on the handbook or will be on the static site editing?
Yeah,
or is it going to be mixed?
Good question. It's a little bit of a TBD. I can give you some initial thoughts on what they're going to be focusing on. One of the thoughts that we've had out there is just focusing the team on upgrading our version of Middleman, which should help with our build speeds. The other thing that we've kind of kicked around a little bit is just doing like a quick prototype of seeing if we can integrate like our handbook into something like a Netlify CMS, which is an open source static site editing tool, and just seeing how well it works and seeing if we can tie back to the MR and the approval flows really quickly, because that's the one thing we don't want to lose with respect to some of our handbook edits, and why we wouldn't want to at this point in time migrate it back to say like a wiki or some sort of other tool like that, even though that would give us a much better editing experience for non-technical users, is because you lose a lot of the version control, you lose a lot of the approval flows that you have, and there's just some benefits to leaving it as part of a static site where it's more of a version controlled system with approval flows. So that's probably the two things that we would have the team focus on in the short term. I think there's even a possibility for integrating something like Netlify CMS or some sort of other open source static site editor into the application.
Thanks for that.
Yeah, you're welcome. Thanks for the question. All right, Jeff, you've got the next one.
So I was just setting up some recent milestones in Epics, and I promoted I created one at a repo level, and I promoted it to the group. However, it's a child group in a larger thing. So I have like demo systems and I have infrastructure as a subgroup, and the milestones don't seem to share group hierarchy. And I'm just curious if I'm missing something from moving between groups or seeing, parent-child hierarchy of milestones.
Gabe, are you able to speak to that one? I see you on now.
Yes, I can. The child group milestone is also not visible in the parents list of milestones. The hierarchy goes downwards, if that makes sense, not upwards. So like, I don't believe if you're in the parent, you would see what's in the child, but if you're in the child, you should see what's in the parent. That's the basic relationship there. So does that answer your question?
To an extent, I don't think that's displaying what I think I'm seeing. And the other piece is, can I move a milestone up the group hierarchy? Can I move it from my infrastructure subgroup up to my demo systems parent group?
Good question. You should be able to promote project milestones to group milestones. Let me see if you can do, I don't know if you can go up groups.
I just can't change group ownership is the challenge. There's not a drop-down menu for that I couldn't find. So.
Yeah, I don't believe you can, but that was a good suggestion. It's similar to issues we're having with label management as well, where like you can promote a label from a project to a group, but then like to make it go to the top level group, it doesn't work cleanly.
Exactly.
So we're definitely tracking that.
Okay, cool. Thanks.
All right, Valmir, do you want to verbalize your question?
Yeah, sure. I was trying to find the right window here. So my question is if we have any plans of adding the MRs on boards, since today they are only issue boards, and sometimes people may just work on an MR that has no issue linked to it. So do we have any plans on doing that?
I can speak to that too. We've played around with it. There is an open issue that somebody is open to discuss it. It makes sense, I think, especially as we look to have more configurable like workflows that kind of map to the cycle analytics work that the managed group is doing. I think the first thing that we're probably going to do is introduce horizontal swim lanes into issue boards so that you can track epics, among other things within an issue board. What I would like to do is explore that further to see if it makes sense and to make issue boards a little bit more generic. One of the things that is on the roadmap for the year is to make them more contextual based on the specific type of activity that you're doing. So teams typically go through like a planning phase or a grooming phase or like their current sprint view. And I would like to provide specific layouts and configurations for each of those common team tasks. And one of those could very well be like a merge request view that lets you see like the workflow of merge requests. So definitely open to it. And if you want to, I'll look up the issue and put it into the agenda so you can add to it.
I just did, Gabe, for you, for your convenience.
Thank you.
Okay, Christopher, I've caught you mid-typing, but you're next.
Yeah, it's just a curiosity. So I've heard high-level feedback from senior leadership around the fact that this is one of the more mature areas of the product, and we should really be focusing on a great, if not fantastic, user experience in this area. So one of the things I was looking at the charts, and I was kind of noticing we're getting to complete, obviously, in the middle of next year in a number of areas, but like I'd be curious if there was any feedback of things we should be thinking about. And the way I've posed is, if you had infinite resources, which category would you want to make lovable as kind of just a high level, just to kind of give us a feel for that, or how we would basically push us over the threshold from that perspective.
Yeah, I think that's a really good question. Do I only get to pick one category?
No, you can pick several, but you can't pick all.
Not all. I can't just say all. Okay.
Yeah, that's too much of an out. Like you have to have like some semblance of hey, this is the most important. Like what I'm really looking for is less about getting infinite resources and more about which things we see as being critical to customers.
Yeah. So I'll caveat my answer and say that source code management and code review are two of our three lovable categories across all of GitLab. And something, before I answer your question, I will answer it in a sec. Something that's just really important to keep top of mind is that we stay lovable in those categories. We have to stay lovable in those categories, because if you look at the sales motion for how a lot of adoption happens, a lot of how a lot of deals coming in, they really get their ins into GitLab in either source code management, code review, or CI. And those are our 3 lovable products. And they start there in the middle of the DevOps lifecycle, and then you start to see people expand kind of left and right. And so, you know, the dev section strategy that I've linked in slide 2, if you go down to some of the themes that we're going to focus on over the next year, you'll see kind of like a growth driver. And most of those growth drivers are actually going to be something like expansion or retention, where we expect people to come into the product for create and verify. We expect them to stay for things like plan and some of the analytics and manage and some of the package repository features, and hopefully even secure, defend, monitoring all the way down to the right side of the DevOps lifecycle. But we're not necessarily, you know, leading the tip of the spear from a sales motion with, say, plan features at this point in time or configure features at this point in time. And so, assuming that you give me those 2 for free, Christopher, that I get to keep source code management and code review lovable, which in my opinion is probably the most important thing to do in over the next year, probably even over the next 2 or 3. The ones that kind of pop to the top of my mind are boards, roadmaps, and auth. Those are the 3 that come to my mind. And just to focus really quick on auth, and Jeremy, I would love you to kind of chime in with color. This is really going to help us get more enterprise grade. We've talked about enterprise grade being a big theme for dev in fiscal year 21. You can see that as part of our dev strategy document in our handbook, and something that I really want to see become lovable ASAP is authentication and authorization. It's one of those table stakes things, but it's incredibly important to get these larger organizations to adopt GitLab.
Yeah, I'd second that, Eric. It's the table stakes thing that enterprises need to be successful in our application. And I think that we see this especially on GitLab.com, where I just got off a customer call where they enumerated their biggest concerns, and SSO is kind of at the top of that list with a bullet. So I think that you know, right now, the group that is responsible for authentication authorization kind of struggles with the prioritization and trade-off decisions between security issues and kind of solving those problems for those customers. So I totally agree. As enterprise readiness will likely be a huge theme for dev, kind of in the next currently and continue to be over the next fiscal year. I think that investing in auth is going to pay pretty significant dividends for us over the long term.
Thanks for that question, Christopher.
No problem. Can I do one more follow-up?
Absolutely.
Since nobody else has one. So I hate to do this to you. You opened yourself up. You said that you want to keep the 2 categories lovable. So how do we make sure they stay lovable? Like, is there anything we're thinking about, or what is our tactic there?
Yeah. Let me head on over. So there's a few things that that I think we need to do, and these are all in the dev strategy page in our handbook. So one of the things that we need to do is embrace real time a little bit more. You had mentioned real time before, but real time in this context means the application being real time in the fact that most two or more people looking at the same thing should be able to see how the other person is moving things around. So boards is a big thing that we need to focus on getting real time, but think about like the IDE, getting live coding, real-time editing of issue and MR descriptions, comments, real-time diff and syntax highlighting in the MR for code review experience is important. So that's a theme that you'll see under the create section. There's basic things like Git availability and performance. And so if you look at performance, our merge request page takes a while to load right now. And if you look at what we've scheduled in 12.5, and I believe this is in the second slide of the deck as well, you can see a ton of issues that we're focused on, essentially loading diffs in the MR, improving the caching for some of the syntax highlighting, and making sure that that thing is like super snappy, because it's really the center of the whole application. So that's something that we need to do. Obviously, Git Elite HA incredibly important for organizations that are hosting this thing themselves. Most people are running Giddily on a giant single node that is a single point of failure in their application. And while that's not necessarily related to source code and code review, it's actually a separate category that we don't have on our homepage. It's a foundational component of essentially Git availability and performance. Also enhancing the code review experience to just be a little bit more intelligent. We don't have any of the kind of jump to definition features that GitHub has at this point in time. I think letting code reviewers identify these references in the code review experience, displaying function documentation, type signatures, adding support for first-class reviewers is something we don't do today. I'd like to see code review morph into more of like an IDE-like experience. Language-specific highlighting, Webpacks. These are all things that Tim and I and the broader team have kind of iterated on together and thought about. And then I think just making like large files work in Git, like I already mentioned, kind of the partial clone feature that we're iterating on. Right now, no one really likes using LFS, so that's something that we would like to have people not think about which files need to live in LFS, which files don't need to live in LFS. We just want everything to go into the repo, and then you can decide if you need to actually clone that thing or not, if you have to clone that repository. Those are a few things. I don't know if you want to ask any follow-on questions or if anyone else on the team has thoughts.
Just that was awesome, Eric. Really appreciate the response.
Yeah, thank you for the question. Andre.
Thanks, Eric. Gabe already gave an answer, but I'll ask it again for the recording. So one of my pet peeves of issue boards have historically been how the order affects other boards without me really realizing it. I'll be moving issues from lists to lists, and in effect, where I drop them will kind of affect the ordering on other boards. And I was just trying to pick your brain, Gabe's, how we're planning to fix this. And Gabe already gave an answer. Gabe?
Yeah, this is a common theme that we've heard from customers during interviews and kind of just watching how they use GitLab. We've also experienced this pain point within the plan stage of just, as we split into different groups, like we have a single board, but we each have like group level boards, and then the designers work on the group or on the stage level board, and then they never really know what the real priorities are because we all are just looking at a micro view of that. I think adding in the ability to have local ordering on a board and have that supersede, the global relative ordering, it makes sense. And then I also think one of the things that we've discussed adding is being able to define, like as a issue moves from one list to another, where it should fall, like either at the top, at the bottom, or kind of in the middle. Traditionally, like in Kanban, you would have first in, first out. And so if an issue moves from one state to another, it should go to the bottom. But the teams have different preferences. So it's on the roadmap, something we need to address. And I think it makes a lot of sense.
Thanks.
Thanks for the question, Andre. That is definitely a big point of feedback. Also, I want to see this addressed too. Okay, there are no other questions. And so I will leave you all with a very happy National Donut Day. And here's my fun fact for the day. Did you know that donuts, similar to GitLab, have their origin in the Netherlands? Because I actually did not know that until I looked this up. The earliest origins to the modern donut is generally traced back to oil cake. And if someone can pronounce that better than I can, please chime in, which Dutch settlers brought with them to early New York. So happy National Donut Day, everyone. Bye.
Bye.